I'm really happy in my hometown. I'm from Kaunas. Currently I live and spend here a big chunk of my time. So I'm really happy to see such an interest in innovation entrepreneurship, because I think that what may give a second birth to this city. So I really was asked to speak a little bit about the Lithuanian entrepreneurship and academics and the relationship here. Decided to maybe raise the bar a little bit to the European level, because apparently, on the one hand, Lithuania is definitely a part of European Union at this time, and B, a lot of those questions actually are derivative of European policy as opposed to just Lithuanian. So I don't think it's correct to say a Lithuanian strategy, entrepreneurship, innovation. It's probably more appropriate to see that within the European Union context, especially that in the last years, apparently there has been a ton of conversations that Europe is actually lagging behind regions such as Asia or US, and we came to a moment where we can no longer ignore that, and our wealth, our taxes, our salaries do depend on whether we are or are not able to build the right ecosystem, the right environment for innovation. Okay, sorry for that. Yes, so coming from the business world, I hate abstract sayings. Good is good, bad is bad. I love numbers, because I think only when you do precise measurements, you can see the results, where you are and where you're heading. So first I try to pick the illustration on how successful or unsuccessful Europe is at acquiring the new wealth brought to this world by the technology, by the innovation. So apparently it's very difficult. It's very difficult to measure in numbers, saying, okay, like this region versus that region versus this country versus that country. Like, how do we know precisely, let's say, US is more or less 2 times or 3 times more successful or not relative to Lithuania, European Union? So from venture capital background, I would say that pretty often a proxy for measuring innovation is used number of IPOs. IPOs is initial public offering. For those of you unfamiliar with economics, this is the moment where a private company gets listed on a stock exchange like NYSE or NASDAQ, becomes public. Public means the general public can buy shares, but it also means it, for the first time in the company history, has to reveal its revenue numbers, assets, etc. So it becomes visible. Basically everybody, like how much revenue it generates, how much it costs, how many people it employs, and how much value it's brought to this world. So the value of new companies that get listed is pretty often used as a proxy for like how much wealth we created. And this chart actually shows the split in different regions, how much of the new economics is really, say, acquired by this or that region. And leaving Asia aside for a moment, I'd highlight the US versus European Union. So given that currently, at this moment, in this year, the economies of European versus American are pretty much the same. Basically, the difference is a couple points only. But if you look at the proceeds and the level of IPOs, US versus Europe, we immediately see that half of the world's created wealth by innovations immediately ends up in the US, immediately. So half of everything that the planet builds in innovation immediately gets to the US. And Europe is only able to get third of that. Actually, third of that if measured by proceeds, but if you look by companies, it's only like 27%. So what happens is basically we're saying now technology innovations build new wealth at ever accelerating pace, and the US gets half of that pie, and Europe gets a small portion of that, and Asia gets the rest. So this model basically illustrates that if you scroll the time 20 years from now, the wealth of whole Europe will be probably half of the wealth of the US, although starting point today is the same. So basically it's a warning signal. Basically it means that to economists, it means that all the wealth, the production, the wages, the salaries, it's actually been built after World War II by the, say, Industry 3.0. And Europe is not able to acquire any wealth that is brought by the, say, Industry 4.0. Everybody's heard of the Industry 4.0 revolution. So, and it all ends up in the US. So that's a warning signal. That means, again, I'll repeat myself, if we scroll the time 20 years from now, everything will be half of the US level, and that becomes like Europe relative to the US will be something like Greece relative to Germany today, which apparently is not where Europe wants to be. So when you dig now a little bit into those numbers and say like, what's behind them, a pretty major difference, again, if you analyze different data, a pretty major difference is at how successful the American versus European companies and entrepreneurs are at translating the knowledge and ideas into actual product in companies. So this is another proxy that, say, that economists use, how to measure in dollar value the pace of innovation. Many of you have heard the funding levels, because apparently if you don't put something into something, you cannot expect a big value of that. So unless you invest, you cannot really expect to own the proceeds. That's pretty simple. So, so when we start measuring what precisely drives those values at this graph, again, I did put a couple of companies that everybody very well knows, the Facebooks, the Googles, the Apples, etc. of the world. So these are the companies responsible for those kind of numbers. So each of these companies mentioned is already at hundreds of billions of dollars of valuations. So like huge values. And when you analyze where they're coming from, you immediately see that this is a direct effect of the funding and innovation happening in places like Silicon Valley. So if you look where it's actually coming from, funny enough, you do not discover governments, you do not discover the big, large multinational corporations, you discover startup ecosystems. So Stanford, Silicon Valley, Austin, New York, Boston, so these are the ecosystems that systematically A, absorb a lot of funding, B, are able to produce a lot of companies, and C, grow these companies to multi-hundred-dollar billion values. That in turn reflects on the stock exchanges, and that in turn drives the macroeconomic parameters up. So this is wrong to believe that large, old corporations develop innovations. This is wrong to believe that governments drive that. This is driven by the startup entrepreneurship ecosystems. Again, I'm using the word ecosystems because a success is much more a product of a whole ecosystem than it is of a specific company or idea or human being. Again, somebody said, if you want to produce world's best movie, you just have to be in Hollywood, because this is where you find best actors, best studios, best funding, best distribution, etc., etc., etc. You cannot produce a good movie anywhere else, just because the whole ecosystem is fine-tuned at producing movies. So same with innovation. Again, unless you have multiple pieces, universities, governments, taxes, funding, entrepreneurs, students, ideas, knowledge, etc., all in one place, working organically, you cannot expect big results at scale. So again, coming back to numbers, because this is the language that business speaks, I try to quantify. Okay, fine if Silicon Valley is so great, look at inside, how much is great, how much is producing. So these are the numbers that I found. So these are the numbers that I found, and if you look at just the Stanford University, this is apparently the world's gold standard for the most productive, the most effective ecosystem, but still the numbers are just mind-blowing. So in the last 10 years, statistic is available up to 2016, students, so just only students, not workers, not governments, not corporations, just students of Stanford University got $22.1 billion in funding to fund their ideas. Again, the size of Stanford University is not that much different from Vilnius University or Kaunas University in 2016 and 17. Just 7,000 people entered the university. So we're talking about the size not dramatically different from what we have here in Lithuania. But if you think that those students get $2 billion invested into their companies every single year and build 100 companies every single year, that becomes mind-blowing. Because apparently, if a fraction of that in Lithuania was the case, then Lithuania would be a very, very different country. But again, ironically, it's very similar people, very similar institutions, exactly same knowledge. Because knowledge is flat nowadays. Exactly same books, exactly same information, exactly same knowledge is used with, by Kaunas University or Vilnius or Stanford. There are like no secret sauce, no like alien technologies. It's all like developed by human, but somehow those 7,000 students produce that, and the rest of the world really doesn't. So if you look at the whole history of just one Stanford University, so today the students build companies that employ 5.4 million jobs or people, and produce $2.7 trillion of value every single year. So I know it's mind-blowing, yes. Thank you. Yes. So, so if you look at those numbers, these are just like just incomprehensible. And then something is fundamentally different. Something is fundamentally wrong because, well, apparently, if Lithuania, just one university, was able to produce something like that, apparently the things would be very different. So, what is different? Now, before going back to Europe, I just wanted to highlight one more thing. And if somebody said, "Hey, like Stanford is outside this world, it's something special," nothing like that exists anywhere else. I took some more American universities to illustrate that it's across the board. So if you look north, east, New York area, Boston area, Austin, like all those regions, yes, Stanford is the best, but more or less similar, at least order of magnitude numbers you find everywhere. So systematically, somehow, around those academic bodies, around those communities, you can produce a big economic value. And this is actually what's driving and what's building the whole innovation. Now, again, if you go even one level down and say, like, what's the problem? Apparently, you see a very clear relationship. A lot of value, a lot of investments, a lot of activity. So let's look at who is investing, how much is investing. And here you see behind me a graph basically illustrating different countries in the world and investment into innovation relative to GDP. Right? So it is not weighted yet by the differences in GDP, just like percentage. So apparently, like top of the top, it's not on this chart, but or not highlighted on this chart, but South Korea currently is the most aggressively investing country in the world. So 4% of South Korean GDP is invested into innovation, R&D, new technology, entrepreneurship, 4%. America, US invests around 3% and has been investing around 3% in the last 20, 30 years. European Union in general is slightly less than 2%. And actually it has, on the European Commission level, undertook a goal to basically reach at least 2% innovation funding level in the next 3 years, because apparently it sees a lot of difference in funding levels. And now if you look at Lithuania, it's currently only around 1%. So it's a very, very, very small number. And this is not yet weighted by the actual difference in GDP. Now, I tried to do some funny math around that. These are the another chart, which basically displays the countries by growth, etc. But if you do the math and divide those percentages by the population, then the difference is even more striking. So I calculated how much one average American invests into innovation in dollars every year, and Lithuanian, right? So I'm just like curiosity, who thinks the difference is more than 2 times? Raise your hand. Who thinks the difference is more than 5 times? 10 times. So reality is average American invests into innovation $1,700 every year. Average Lithuanian, $140. 140, 1,700, right? So now a rhetorical question. Now, if we invest so little, like how come we expect so much? How come we are raising questions like why our salaries like so low, why our governments are so poor, why we don't have revenue? Very simple. You don't get unless you invest. I mean, it's very simple. It's rule of thumb. And I don't believe any like fairy tales where you have something by investing nothing. You know, like I'm from practical, hardcore business world. If you invest zero or very little, your return is zero to very little. Very simple. Yeah. And apparently, if you again raise your questions even higher, like saying, hey, like if I was to split those numbers into returns, labor versus capital. And like the whole history of humankind, like all wars and revolutions have been basically illustration of a struggle, like capital versus labor, like the ones owning the resources and the ones working with those resources. There's always been a struggle, but you know, everybody's saying today, you probably heard it multiple times, that the richer get richer and the poor get poorer. I don't believe that non-economists would immediately translate what exactly it means and what the mechanism for wealth redistribution is. And the simple version of the answer is very simple. The return on capital or return on investment is massively larger than return on labor. Because apparently a human being can only work like 24 hours a day physically, that's it. So they're like only 2 legs and 2 hands. And the further we go, the more expensive instruments we need to work with, right? If some days, you know, like a stone was a sufficient instrument, today, like it's hard to imagine a worker working without a computer, a truck, or something worth hundreds of thousands of dollars per working place. Apparently, the biggest return on the efficiency created by those instruments, by this technology, goes as a capital gain to the owners of that technology, right? And it's no longer in the physical world. And then I will take a step back just to highlight that these are, although abstract numbers, you know, like sitting here, well, you know, like 10 or 20 or 100, like what's the difference? I just want to illustrate one specific impact, how those numbers translates into decrease of quality of life in Lithuania, here in the audience including. So I was now like randomly like way off. Who of you have heard of a journalism problem in Lithuania that the headlines hide poor content? Like everybody's saying, poor journalists. Raise your hands if you heard of it, like journalist problem in Lithuania. Okay, so the rest thinks that the journalism is adequate and fulfilling. Okay, but the problem, just to highlight for those who have not raised their hands, or maybe not from Lithuania, is for a long time we've been discussing the problem in Lithuania that the quality of journalism is very poor. The articles that are being written, the news is being reported, are poor quality, no fact checking. The headlines do not correspond with the text, just designed to catch the attention and clicks. So everybody's been complaining, you know, like journalists is terrible. And as of recently, I mean like 3-4 years ago, we even started to talk about the poor quality of journalism starts to become a national threat because of the fake news, because of the manipulated news, because of the news injected and sponsored by the different countries in the world having different political, apparently, intents. And we as a society cannot afford to basically deal with the news itself. And apparently, the opinion of the public is only as good as the news reported to the public, simple as that. Now, if you look at the economic side of the equation, I would say, look, the journalism currently is surviving existential crisis because it used to basically earn their money from selling papers and magazines. In the internet age, nobody pays for news, so no longer you buy physical newspapers and physical magazines. The only source of revenue and earning for the journalism is advertising, the banners on the Dell 15 minutes, etc. Websites. That's the headlines, because the more clicks you get to an article, the more banners you can display, the more revenue you can generate, so the more you can pay for the news channel and the journalist. Now the problem is, if you look at the whole advertising scale in Lithuania, its total advertising market is 200 million euro per year. And currently, as we speak, 100 million euro is gone to Google and Facebook alone, period. Right? So out of 200 million Lithuanian businesses, Lithuanian journalists get to keep half, and another half goes to Google and Facebook specifically. Now, that's a fraction of the problem, because, and again, this is coming from a professional area, if you measure the efficiency of advertising for Google Facebook versus non-Google Facebook, now the difference, the average, would be in the range of 10 to 50%, and sometimes even 50 times. So basically it happens, what it illustrates is that those 100 million that we still keep, that funds the journalists that write the articles, is here temporarily until the businesses discover that, hey, like, it's much more efficient to give that money to Google and Facebook than to give to the news portal, because I will earn more, because their technology is much better at targeting, at finding the right people, and then building the creative and capturing attention. Like, everybody spends time in Facebook. Few people spend time in say, Lithuanian pages. So that means that the remaining 100 million will go down to 10 million in 5 years from now, once businesses just adjust and discover. Now, a rhetorical question: if the whole market for all of journalists, for everything like news in Lithuania, is down from 100 million to 10 million a year, can we expect any journalists at all in the industry? Rhetorical. So, so basically, these things are like typically invisible, and typically are not associated with, again, innovation, technology, entrepreneurship. But I just like wanted to highlight and illustrate how the Facebooks and Googles means that the capital owners behind them are able to suck the revenue out of every single pocket, and it not only affects, say, our salaries, because apparently journalists in Lithuania do not get currently high salaries, period, because they do not have advertisers, because the advertising money is going to Facebook and Google. But beyond just the economic problem, we start seeing things like national threat, because unless we have a good news ecosystem with right journalists writing and highlighting the right news in the right angle, using the correct facts as opposed to manipulation, we cannot defend ourselves against the fake news or manipulated news or propaganda, right? So this is much deeper than just the economic problem. That's a separate issue. I just wanted to highlight how those invisible instruments are affecting our daily life beyond just our salaries. So unless we change something, unless we do something about that, well, I would say we should get concerned. So now, apparently, it's very difficult to summarize the whole ecosystem and pick what are the big things that we could change. Now, the good news is, although I mentioned that the probably lack of investment or poor investment into technology is one of the core reasons. Now, I would say that a lot of things could be changed without, putting cash out of our pockets into the ecosystem. So I would just like highlight something which I think are the most important areas. So apparently, number one thing is, although it sounds abstract, but lack of entrepreneurship mentality. Mentality means desire, motivation, skills, ability, willingness to take risk, responsibility for entrepreneurs or projects. So probably many of you have heard this term Soviet mentality or 9-to-5 mentality, where basically people do not wish to take risks, to take adventures, to build new ideas or to build something. So this is on the cultural level, and I will illustrate it again in a very simple human anecdote level. So when a while ago I was going to my US visit, and I landed in the airport, and a taxi driver took me from the airport to the hotel. We were driving like 30 minutes or so. The driver immediately starts asking, who are you, what are you doing? I will say, well, like I'm related to investments, I do like web technology, internet, etc. So he immediately said, hey, like I'm buying a taxi, but I'm thinking of setting my web page. So it will be easier for me to catch customers. So immediately he used the 30 minutes to learn everything he could possibly about technology, internet, coding, etc. B, he immediately forced me basically to disclose my whole schedule for the whole 7 days, saying what are you doing next time, are we here for a conference, what time it starts, what time you leave the hotel. So by the end of the trip, he booked from me 12 in-hour trips. He said, I will be here that time, I will pick you from the conference, I will pick you to the hotel, etc. So he used the 30 minutes, and that struck me like hard, because I realized it only at the end of the trip, to generate 12 times more business than he originally did by taking one trip. And he did a lot of, took a lot of like free lessons, right? Pretty expensive, I would get lessons, how to build his own online business. That's entrepreneurship mentality, right? Again, unless you do that, so I figured to myself, well, that taxi driver probably is okay, and probably he gets like a much higher salary relative to Lithuanian taxi driver, etc. And that, a very simple thing, just in mentality. So yes, it's abstract, but at every single level, like seeing the opportunities, being proactive, investing into innovation, and basically taking the risk and taking responsibility immediately translates into revenue, because next week was very well for a driver. He earned a lot, but he could have lost me as a customer, like immediately. So these are the illustrations how it works. Now, the second challenge, and this is a pretty painful point, is that the whole academic system currently in Lithuania as well as in Europe is disconnected from the business reality. I'm not blaming individual institutions, universities, etc. And I was giving an interview just before this keynote and highlighting that it's probably a highest possible level decision for a society and politicians. Like, how do we see universities and academics? What do we require from them? What are the KPIs that are we asking them to fulfill? Because I just illustrated how successful American educational system is in translating the knowledge into actual dollars. And if you look at Lithuania, by far it's not the case. If you start digging into why it's not working, you realize at every single level it's a structural difference. Again, another life story. Like, we invest in companies apparently. This is our core business in Lithuania. We do a lot of investments into startups. And we get a lot of startups coming from universities and saying, hey, like I just discovered this cool technology. We could measure blood pressure out of your wrist using the laser detectors. We could build like smart watches much better than what Samsung has today. This knowledge, this technology exists in Lithuania. When we start doing a due diligence, saying, well, okay, fine, looks interesting, we would invest, we would help you build the company on that, but let's figure out like who owns what kind of rights, etc. Reality is, in Lithuania, students do not own the rights to their own work. So if I spend 2,000 hours building my master, bachelor degree, etc., if I build a prototype, a technology, I discovered something, I do not have the right to use that as a student, period. That specific student who discovered that interesting technology that we could translate into interesting company, he happens by the rule not to own the rights. So you, the university, can you unlock that right? What we discover is that there is zero practices, zero desire, zero ability, zero regulatory framework. Like, the only model that universities do, and this is not a joke, they say, well, we can offer that student to buy this IP from us. And in a real example, happened 1 year ago in one of the Kaunas universities. University asked 200,000 euro, I'm not kidding, for the student basically to own the rights to the technology that they created. Because if university gets cash, immediate bonuses to like the whole management level, etc. Alternatively, they say, well, I wish I could. There is no regulations. I cannot take shares in this startup company because I have no idea how to account them. I have no regulations, etc., etc. So practically, the conversation does not happen. That means that everything that students have created, built, desired, is just locked behind the university doors, and there is like no keys. They are lost for the time being behind that knowledge. On top of a huge patent database, on top of all the resources that typically are concentrated massively in the hands of universities, I mean labs, equipment, space, knowledge, etc., etc. So we're sitting on a gold treasure, but we cannot unlock that. Again, patents, the government is spending millions of dollars, of euros every year to fund universities get patents. Again, when we were doing a due diligence on the IP owned by universities, discovered that at this moment as we speak, Lithuanian universities own tens of billions of dollars in patent value, and there's like zero ways to actually use them, to give, to translate, to invest into students. Coming back to students, again, like those numbers that I mentioned in Stanford, etc., partially, students are able to attract so much investments because they're able to convert whatever they invented or discovered in universities into actual companies. So very often my master's degree is the beginning of my company because it's a meaningful, say, couple thousand hours investment into something new. So if you look at Lithuania, tens of thousands of students every year spend thousands of man-hours discovering and doing something. So we're talking like hundreds of millions of dollars worth time, high value, high academic, high research, high knowledge value, translated and basically wasted. Because once they submit their work done, it's wasted, it's not used. So we're talking about hundreds of millions of euro of worth. Even if we measure, it's just like purely hours, 10 euro an hour, basic measures, it's called wasted, not used at all. Then no surprise that they get zero result from all this activity. So there's like no framework, no regulations, no practice, no mentality, no incentive, no desire, etc. But again, it would be wrong to blame individual universities or managers. I would raise the question and say, okay, like what do we expect from the academic body in Lithuania? Just purely academic results? Or we want to see some economics as well, because in other parts of the world, apparently knowledge does translate into dollars or euros. In our part of the world, it doesn't. So part of that is we focus on theory versus practice, apparently having a big focus specifically the academic results, the publications, the patents. There is a big disruptance, like, okay, how do we actually apply that to business, to reality? Apparently, a painful problem is lagging behind the real life. Apparently, the whole ecosystem of education in Lithuania is built in a way which is not compatible with real-time knowledge acquisition. And as you know, most professions that are hottest and the highest paid on the market have been created as profession like just 3 years ago. And the academic community that is not capable of translating real-time knowledge into professions, into education, is basically not producing the people that can be professionally successful in real life. Apparently, this is something outside and beyond a little bit say academic world. But apparently, if you look at the whole society system, apparently we're talking that Europeans are much more regulated and protected, etc. So this is another, say, degree of freedom, but a big decision where we really want to focus more on the social protections, etc., or innovations, because pretty often these are like just incompatible, like very incompatible. Almost as a joke, I was talking to one venture capitalist who has been investing in France, and he says, well, like as a rule of thumb, venture capital does not go to France because funding companies is funding risk. If a company fails, you just stop funding and that's it. And you cannot fire a person in France. And that specific company was lack of money, so they were looking to get rid of a couple of developers, and they calculated that just to let off one programmer would cost them 300,000 euros. Just pay all those obligations by the company. So if the business is faced with the obligation basically to pay that much, very simple things happen. The business does not hire those people. So the business goes into predictable areas. I say, hey, like I build a hotel, I can calculate and be pretty like precise how many people will I need, what kind of revenue I get, so I can afford taking those obligations. Now, if I build a new startup, a new company, I have no idea how the product sells, so I am not guaranteed on whether I will or will not sell the product. I will or will not need that specific person like 3 months from now. I simply cannot start that because the moment I hire somebody, government puts all the social obligation on top of the employer, the company, as opposed to the society, and businesses do not create. Simple as that. Capital does not go. The companies do not get funded. Innovation does not happen. Again, the big proceeds and the big wealth is created outside the European Union. So these are very simple things. And currently, derivatives of that is a small link between business and universities. Again, as a fund, we tried to build innovation partnerships with probably like a dozen Lithuanian universities in the last 2 years, because apparently we did want to fund successful ideas, successful students. We realized, unfortunately, again, this is not blaming universities, this is probably blaming the reality. We did not find any practical way to work together, right? So on the high level, every single university says we support startups, we support innovation, we support ecosystem. At the signature level, well, you have to put signature. Everything breaks down. So rhetoric does not correspond with reality and practice. And after 2 years, we gave up. We said, yeah, like we wished we were able to invest millions into Lithuanian startups. We can't. Like even if we brought the money, there is no vehicle, no mechanism to do that. So unfortunately, that's like deeper than it is on the surface. And apparently, the last thing I want to highlight, not the least, is, and again, that's my personal opinion, take it for what it's worth. I do believe that the public funding model that European Union has adopted is very inefficient. Apparently, probably all of you have heard of the, say, Lithuanians being very creative and very successful at acquiring money sources. Even the new term, the new profession has been born, acquiring the money. And even now, like when most of those European sources are coming to the end, you all know 2020 is hard stop, like no more European funding for innovations, for most of the projects. Even now we get a ton of applications, probably 80% of funding applications begin with the word, because the potential funding from European Union is available, and then they write the idea, and you understand that the whole product, the whole idea, the whole company is designed just to acquire the money. And this is the wrong sequence, because people build products that nobody needs, nobody wants, quality is whatever, just because the funding is available. So the efficiency of European money is very questionable. So yeah, you could talk like forever, but apparently we're pretty limited on time, so I'll do a hard stop here. As the moderators told, there are a couple more questions, but for now, thank you.
Thank you. We have a microphone in the audience, so I would like to encourage you to raise your hand and pose some questions for the speaker that we have here in front of us. And if no question is available, so I
somebody has it.
Oh, we have in the first row, please.
Thank you very much. I could listen to you for hours.
Thank you.
With respect to talking about innovation challenges, I marked two of them. Weak connection between universities and business, and education lies between your life. And you simply knocked into my heart, because we all care about that very much. I don't know much about universities, but let's say colleges are trying to build connections with the business world as much as we can, but, well, they don't react sometimes.
You mean businesses or they?
Yeah, right, businesses. And my question is, what about you, a young businessman, successful entrepreneur, and your colleagues? How much inner motivation do you have to go to universities, to higher education institutions, and to bring your knowledge and skills there to help the universities for the
Right. So I would split the, say, the collaboration or working together into separate areas. One is, call it the educational or evangelizing, right? Just talking, speaking, sharing, etc. This is probably a function of individual, right? So I'm coming here to speak mostly without any commercial motives, etc. Because I give sharing the knowledge is a driving motive for every person. That's my personal opinion. So you would be surprised how many Lithuanian successful businesses would just like come and share if you just like were to invite. So pretty often, totally the opposite when you talk to, you know, like businessmen in Lithuania saying, hey, like, you know, like, I'm spending, you know, like, maybe 10 lectures a month in different universities. Why don't you? They say, we don't invite me. That's the most typical answer. So I would say that is a very simple thing. If it's just pure logistics of inviting and organizing and asking them to speak was organized, you could expect coming back and sharing. So this is not a problem at all. Now the more difficult part is actual commercial collaboration, right? Commercial, by definition, is driven by profit, ability, and desire. It's an obligation for the business to generate profit because this is what we are obliged by the law, by the moral code, to their investors. Businesses exist to drive profits, to reward investors for investing in the business, period. So I see some skeptics here. I would highlight that as a primary function. Apparently, you could have like a lot of secondary functions, the social missions, all this kind of stuff, but primary function, the definition of a business, is to translate your savings as investors into profits, so by the time the pension comes, there is somebody to pay the pension. That's like the essence of the business nature. So in most successful countries like US, apparently, I want to expand because apparently I see some skepticism. I want to explain like why, in a capitalism world, businesses are there to generate profits. Because a typical business would be a public company. A public company means the shares of that company are owned either by individuals or by pension funds or other institutional investors. Pension funds apparently is a derivative of your pensional savings. So if a society says, hey, like we accumulated 100 million of pensions and in 20 years we want to see 200 million, this money goes into pension fund disburses and invests the money into businesses, and the business responsibility is to multiply that money because it's a primary function of the business. And in a way, create salaries, create taxes, create wealth, create a return for investors. That's the essence of a business. Apparently, of course, there are like a lot of secondary functions. But again, coming back to the formula, so I do assume that the commercial incentive for the business could be either finding or not finding a commercial angle. So I can apparently only speak about myself. So my business is investing. So it's very simple. I mean, you identify new technology, hard pulse, smart sports, virtual reality, crypto economics, like whatever. You identify interesting ideas and interesting companies or people. So again, in the most standard model, apparently the biggest source of scientists and students working on the high-end technology is universities by definition. This is the highest of the highest knowledge ends up. So having access to tens of thousands of Lithuanian students is my core interest. And apparently the formula is very simple. There is technology, there is a team, and there is investment, cash investment coming from our fund. Combined together, we hope to build a company, and then if a company is successful, like again, it gets listed on the NASDAQ, it gets purchased by the bigger company, etc. This is how we get financial return on our investments. I'm just like explaining that the model is pretty simple. But again, in specifically the academic angle, what we came across is when we identify the team, we identify the technology, the first round of due diligence immediately reveals that the technology is not owned by the team. If 3 students have developed a new crypto algorithm that could be used in the new, say, crypto money instrument, that right to that algorithm will not belong to those students. It will belong to the university. That's Lithuanian reality. Every single university reserves small print that reserves all the right to all IP created by all students, employees, etc., etc. So on top of that, apparently, the universities most often will have other resources like patents, etc. So then our natural step as investor would be saying, hey, like, let's sit together, university as owner of the IP rights to patent and to the all work created by those students, the technology and the students. So let's find a way to work. And again, the most common way, if you see the models like Stanford, is to build a joint venture. So let's build a company. Half of that belongs to the team, quarter of that belongs to an investor, quarter of that belongs to the university. If the team builds something meaningful and that company becomes a Facebook worth 100 billion, then 25 billion goes to the university, 25 billion goes to investors, 50 billion goes to Zuckerberg and the team. Right, so this is a purest possible model. So that's a model. Now, where it breaks up is there is no commercial law, rights, regulations, etc. that allow university to invest into the company, period. The only model is university asking the company or the investor saying, pay our cash, we will license you whatever you created yourself, and that will be expensive. So that's the only model that we encountered in the last 2 years in Lithuania. Nothing else worked. We had a couple of experiments where we were, say, doing something different schemes, and none of them, again, worked just because the regulation is not there, motivation is not there, and by the time you ask the same guy who's saying, hey, like I support innovation in the public, you say, well, would you put a signature on the contract that transfers the IP that is developed by your students in your university into a company belonging to the students? So the moment you ask for a signature, everything breaks down. So that's a practical example. Lithuanian reality, venture capital business, and I'm saying honestly, again, there's like more than 10 different universities, colleges, etc. in Lithuania that we are trying to build links, because apparently we want to fund, we need people's ideas, etc. Reality is we can't, so we figured out, well, until something changes, we wish, but there isn't like a practical way to build businesses. So that's on the commercial side. So I'm more than happy to share back the knowledge. This is a big mission, this is fun, this is great. Commercially, I have not yet been able to find the actual formula.